Okay, so on deep water fishing, it's really important that everyone has a marker, whether that's a bunch of trees or a red house or whatever it may be. And each person's given a marker and they have to cast towards it. If they're miles off, they wind in immediately and recast. If you're worried that your bait's washing out after 30 seconds of winding in, well, it's going to be sinking for 6.5 minutes. So you probably haven't put your bait on properly to start with. But anyway, cast to your marker. It's most important because if the lines will be almost parallel off the tripod, because it's so deep, and it's really important that they're not going to overlap. If a big fish comes up and starts kiting one way or the other, picks up the other line, and it can then be game over and loads of lost braid on the mark. So cast to your marker, that's the first thing. Okay, so you've cast out, you've hit your marker, and now a long drop is ahead of you. So if there's a bit of a side wind, just feather the line off slightly, and it will help it will dissuade the wind from taking your line into a bigger bow than it already is. Because your line's in a massive bow, by the time it reaches the bottom, it's curving in the air, and then it's sinking vertically, and then when it hits the bottom eventually, there's a big bow in the line which we've got to get out. We'll get on that in a second. But as it's dropping, if your braid hasn't seen the light of day for several weeks and you haven't done this sort of deep water fishing, or the reel hasn't been used for this sort of fishing for a while, the old salty water on the braid will have dried out deeper down in the spool, and it's kind of, the salt fuses the braid slightly, so you need to peel the line off physically because it will be stuck. You can use the rod tip to flick the rod up, let some line out, or you can just peel it off manually. It's not always the case. Once you've done one cast, the next cast you don't have to do that. But feather the line down and you will feel it hit bottom even after at that depth. But the deeper it goes, the slower it goes. So we reckon like first 50 meters, it's about a second every meter, and then it slows down because that lead's towing all that extra braid through the water, so it gets slower and slower till when you're near the bottom, it's probably 1 meter every 5 seconds. Okay, so when you're on the bottom, first thing you do is slacken the drag off to about 5 pound of pressure. If you get a big fish picks you up immediately because you're using braid, it can literally pull the rod out your hands if you've got a lock drag from casting. So slacken the drag off straight away. Then what you do is you have to mend the line. So you need a true straight line from your rod tip straight to your lead. So if you were to just let it settle, it would take every deviation all the way down around the cliffs, outcrops and everything. So you don't want to wind through that. You want it dead straight to the lead. So you use the rod tip, you wind it down gently, and then you slowly lift up the rod tip. And if you stop pulling, you'll see the rod tip will straighten up on its own. That means the line's not quite mended. And the first bit of the mending's easy. There's loads of bow in the line. The last bit, the last sort of 5-10 meters, takes a while. And you put the rod in the rest thinking you've mended, and the tip will slowly come up. So it's very important to just keep turning that spool while it's in bait runner mode, say, or loose drag in the tripod. Turn the spool just so you can get a little bend in the tip, and that bend is really important. It tells you that you've mended. And also, if you get a drop back bite and your bait's been down an hour, you'll know something's been messing around with your bait. So you think, maybe there's something sat on it. If there's no bend in the rod, you're either not mended or you've had a bite and you've missed it. Right, so you've started getting a bite. Quite often ling will pick up the bait and move slightly. Say you'll get a little run and you think, oh, grab the rod, just leave it be. We often just put our foot on the butt cap of the rod. If it carries on running after say 10 or 15 seconds, it most likely has swallowed the bait. But quite often they'll pick up the bait, drop it, and then they'll play around with it for anything from a minute to sort of 20 minutes. Suddenly the rod will slowly go over, and then it will just continually peel line. That fish is on, generally. So you pick up the rod, make sure you're fully in position before you touch the drag or touch the bait runner. Make sure you're completely comfortable and your rod's pointing out exactly towards the place you've cast at. Then you just set your drag, then let the fish pull you down, so you're almost pointing at the fish. Once you're in that position and the fish is still moving, you just lean. You don't strike. Striking achieves nothing. If you've hooked it, all you do is annoy it. If you haven't hooked it, you might spook it. If you lean into it and the fish isn't on, all you've done is pulled the bait out of his mouth, it'll grab it again. If it's on, then fireworks can happen, because if it's a big fish, be prepared for it to suddenly swim in the opposite direction and take line, which is why it's important that your drags are set at the right setting. So initially during the fight, the fish will have a lot of fight in it, especially if it's a 20 pluser. It will take line off you a couple of times. Let it do it. Don't try and stop it. Don't try and beat it up. Let it do its thing, and then you're going to slowly bring it up through the ledges and through the depth. If you try bullying it up, the problem is you could either injure the fish to the point where it just gives up halfway. Then if you hit a ledge, you're a bit knackered, because you need the fish to swim out the ledges for you. So when you feel the fish swimming into a ledge, just ease off, hold station with a little bend in the tip. Be prepared. If it starts swimming back down, let it swim back out the ledge. If the tip pops up on its own, the fish has done it for you, then you're back in business. But it's really important, you don't try it. You can't pull a fish through a cliff. This is why we use tapered leaders on top of the braid. We trim the fin end off the tapered leader, so it's about 35 to 80 pounds instead of 20 to 80. Then we FG knot it onto 40-pound braid. That means there's a weak point, which is the 35-pound mono, which is brutally strong. You can't snap it with rod pressure, but it does give you a weak point. So if you do end up completely stuck, you know your weak point is there, and all you're losing is tapered leader. That will rot out within 12 months, and that's not a problem. You start losing braid on the mark, that will never rot, and there's no current on deep water, so that's the end of it. That can ruin a mark. People think, oh, I'm using a 100-pound braid, I'm using 200-pound braid. It wouldn't matter if you had a pickup truck with a winch on the front of it. If that got stuck in the cliff, you'd snap the winch eventually. So it's really important to have a weak point somewhere on your line. So if you've had a cast and you've bait's been out, say, an hour and 20, and you've not had a touch, pick the rod up, wind in a metre of line, lift the tip gently. The bottom's mud at that depth. You'll feel it just move along about a metre, put it back in the rest and reset the tip. Make sure the bait runner's still on. Quite often, if a fish is nearby, it will pick it up. Or there might be a fish laid on and you don't know it, and then you will know it. But either way, do that 10 minutes before you're due to wind in to change your bait. Just gives it that little last chance of something picking it up. Then if you wind in without a fish, basically you need to wind like the clappers. You need to tighten your drag so as the spool's not slipping, and you need to keep the rod tip straight out, not high sticking it, because you're just pulling it into the cliff. Rod straight out, wind like the clappers. So you're going to burn out, because it's about 400 turns of the handle. So what we tend to do, we have a mate stood by, and as soon as you say, I'm going, they'll jump in, you'll still hold the rod, and they'll just spin the handle. It looks a bit suspect, but it does work. It gives you a break. But then eventually, you're quite possibly going to hit the cliff. Without a fish on, you must rely on the lead to pull you out. So you don't pull in hard. If you hit the cliff, stop pulling immediately. And then the harder you pull, the harder it is to get back out. So what you do is you get the tip at about 45 degrees, if you're about 10 foot above the water. If you lower the tip, the line will sit on the surface. If the line sinks immediately, the lead's rolling back down the cliff. If it rolls 10 foot, therefore it must have rolled the hook out. If it's done that, you should be out and carry on winding. If it doesn't do that, you just flick the tip really gently and then drop it quicker than you flick it. You must drop it immediately, because if you hold, the lead won't bounce out. If you can just create a little spring, the lead will pop out the cliff, because the cliff's almost vertical. It'll roll back down, pull the lead out. And sometimes this can take 10 minutes because it might be stuck a little bit awkward. That generally works. If that doesn't work, you don't move on to break-in. What you do, you put it back in the rest, because quite often there's small cod, 5-pounders, patrolling the ledges. They'll see your bait, thank you very much. They'll pull you out the snag. You'll get the fish in and everyone's happy. If that doesn't work, after sort of 15 minutes in the rod rest, then you start pulling sharpish. You lock the drag and you start giving it proper yanks to try and break the lead off. But it shouldn't come to that. We fished that day with Jansen. We had several casts each and nobody lost a single lead. So let's give a bit about the rigs we use. It's no secret, we're fans of single hook rigs. The thinking is, if you've got 2 hooks and they're both in the fish, you don't need one of those hooks. If they're not both in the fish, you're going to have a problem pulling a fish up the cliffs and all through the snags with a hook hanging out of his mouth. So single hook rigs are favoured. Octopus type where the hook point isn't parallel to the shank, because they don't tend to grab the rocks and the snags quite as much. Plain leads, easier to bounce out. You don't need a grip lead. Rotten bottom's really important. So you've got a single hook rig. We put a bit of tubing on the hook knot, and that helps grip the bait elastic. You've got to wind your bait on really tight. A lot of water pressure down there, little fish nibbling at it. You want a bait to stay for an hour. So single hooks, really important. And as long as you've got that weak point in your line where your tapered leader meets your braid, you shouldn't have major issues.
Never stop dreaming. Never stop dreaming. Never stop Never stop Never stop dreaming. Never stop dreaming. Never stop dreaming. Never stop Never stop Never stop dreaming. Never stop Never stop dreaming. Never stop dreaming.
Set of Rubinators calibrated. They're on 0, no tampering. Keep them in focus or in shot. And then up again, John. Up you go, John. Come on. Give her a shake. It's hard to get a jig because they're right on their limit. I'm going to call it a 61 pound. Was she off the ground?
No.
61 pound. That is a new shore record ling for Mr. Jansen Teakle. Right, so we're in northern Norway, near Bodo, with Jansen Teakle. He's on the last day of his holiday. A little bit of deep water to finish the week off and kill him off properly. He's ruined his back with a new European record ling of 61 pounds. Jansen, how do you feel, mate?
Well, absolutely ecstatic, mate. I just cannot begin to explain. Yeah, my back is absolutely killing me. I do suffer with chronic back pain anyway. This, what you see, has pretty much finished me off. But when that fish broke surface, wow.
Amazing.
It was like an inflated pig just popped
Yeah.
up on the top. Yeah, but what a scrap.
Yeah.
I mean, I was literally bent double there with that fish on. And I thought, if this comes up and it's only £20, I'm going to look a right muppet. But no, I mean, over £60, it's just mind-blowing stuff. I can't believe it.